In my experience, most of the probable hoax hate cases I discuss on this channel never actually get definitively exposed as hoaxes. We're talking all the innocuous things, like a note left on a car windshield, or the ominous stuffed animal supposedly warning its victim of her forthcoming deportation or execution, or of course the countless cases of participation award-worthy bungled swastikas that strangely often appear in the exact sort of well-to-do white neighborhoods you would think the Nazis would want. All these cases, it stands to reason, are designed to perform exactly as they do. By design, there is no significant victimization. Nobody actually gets hurt. At worst, it's just an afternoon graffiti cleanup project. So the case is low on police priority, but still generates all the politically beneficial headlines. And then the story just fades away, and the truth never gets served, only the politics. Every so often, the truth does get out, though, and even if it's way too late, late is, of course, better than never, and the Washington Post surprised me last week with a detailed piece updating the record on one of the central stories that drove the post-election hate crime narrative. It was a hate crime wave in Trump's America, except the further we get from that frenzy, and the more we analyze each of those stories on a case-by-case basis, the clearer it becomes that wasn't America at all, just someone's agenda-driven projection of it. Dateline, November 14th, 2016, within a week of Trump's election, some Nazi supposedly spray-painted Heil Trump, a swastika, and fag church on St. David's Episcopal in Bean Blossom, Indiana. That week, the church's lesbian reverend appeared on CNN to explain that it's actually okay, that the church was targeted for all the right reasons, implicitly because they're morally virtuous outliers in a state full of socially backward conservatives.
I was excited in some ways, which sounds weird, I know, because we were targeted for the right reason. Our presiding bishop-elect, Michael Curry, says sometimes that doing the right thing is not always the popular thing. And if that's why we were targeted, we're okay with that.
And funny, they left the graffiti up for a couple weeks to leverage the virtue as publicly as possible.
The reason we're leaving it up, though, is symbols are what you make of them. By leaving these up, they're symbols of hope. We allow those in the area and in the nation to know that we are a safe haven and we are welcoming. And if you're in the nation and you see these things on the news and in articles, to know that an Episcopal church around the corner is welcome and inclusive for you as well.
Okay, but if a symbol is just what you make of it, it's just a matter of interpretation, and we don't know who made the symbol or why, how are you possibly inferring hate as the motive? If you can flip these symbols to be symbols of hope and love instead, why can't the vandal? How do we know this wasn't a love crime instead of a hate crime? Doesn't matter. Beside the point. Key takeaway, this is Trump's fault.
Reverend, what do you want to hear Donald Trump say?
I do want Donald Trump to be more proactive.
It's interesting to scroll through the comments on this video. The overwhelming majority were calling this a hoax on site 3 years ago, but not a moment of this segment ever entertained the distinct possibility that this could be a dishonest publicity stunt with absolutely no basis in reality. And few other media outlets considered that possibility either. The story was featured in several larger stories about the post-election hate crime surge fueled by our orange furor, stories that remain without update or correction to this day. If you were new to this case and you were aggregating news stories about post-election hate incidents, these sources would still have you believe that's exactly what this case was. Even the Washington Post, who's finally featuring what actually happened here, published at the time that this case is among numerous hate incidents in post-election Trump's America. They also cited a black student at Baylor who supposedly was pushed by a white male who said, "Hey, no N-words allowed on the sidewalk," and a University of Michigan student who supposedly had a stranger threaten to light her hijab on fire if she didn't remove it. The trouble is, just like today's church story, neither of these things happened as reported either. Baylor police were never able to substantiate any of the sidewalk shove story, and Ann Arbor police say that alleged hijab threat never happened either. And whoops, the Washington Post just forgot to update the page to note that the other stories they used to add context to this bullshit story were also bullshit. The narrative gets served first, the truth gets served later, to a much less visible effect. And that's why this story is still featured in the Southern Poverty Law Center's compilation of post-election hate as well. This is the sort of agenda-driven data collection that gets cited as authoritative by media outlets, and the cycle repeats. So what actually happened at this Indiana church? Those YouTube commenters were able to correctly sniff out the general hoax, but the finer details about who did this, how the case was cracked, and the Washington Post's framing of the story are all very interesting. There was a key part of that CNN interview where the Reverend describes how she heard the bad news.
Sunday morning, I was alerted by my organist that our church had been vandalized.
She heard about it from the church organist, but why would the church organist be the first to know? Does he double as some kind of facility manager or morning janitor? Is he just a really rusty organist who has to get to service several hours early to practice, or what? No, he knew about the vandalism because he did the vandalism, and reporting it is a method of covering one's own tracks. The organist is Nathan Stang, also a gay man who admitted to police in May of 2017 that he did the graffiti because, quote, "I was fearful, scared, and alone too in my fear. I guess one of the driving factors behind me committing the act was I wanted other people to be scared with me." Thanks to this Washington Post piece, we actually get footage of what this confession looked and sounded like, recorded on a keychain camera by Brian Schrader, the Brown County Sheriff's deputy who worked this case for 6 months prior to this moment.
Do you mind if I ask what leads you to believe all of this?
There's irrefutable evidence that you were there Saturday night. You were at the church Saturday night.
What evidence is that?
I can tell you that we pulled surveillance. You gotta understand. The FBI got involved in this case. They have a lot more avenues. They're a lot smarter people than I am at pulling different evidence from wherever. Cell phone technology shows where people go. There's overwhelming, irrefutable evidence that you were there Saturday night before you discovered it Sunday morning. It's not a matter of if you did this, Nathan. It's really not. I think you were very scared and you did something that was spur of the moment, completely out of your character. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Where did the paint come from?
From Bloomington Hardware. Down the street here. I was just terrified.
Interestingly, the detective used a combination of truth and embellishment to coax that confession. He did have cell phone location data, that is true, but the prosecutor believed that was insufficient evidence on its own to charge or convict Stang. So Detective Schrader used a combination of a friendly cop approach and overstating the evidence and the circumstance. There was no surveillance footage, and the FBI had never actually been involved, to get Stang to confess. Now, is that ethical? Maybe. Maybe not. That's a debate for another day. But in this case, I say that's what he gets for staging a hoax and for wasting law enforcement time and for scaring his community and for not thoroughly exercising his right to talk to a lawyer before he says a damn thing to the cops. Regardless, he came out with a slap on the limp wrist anyway. A judge sentenced him to probation and 300 hours of community service, a sentence far more lenient than the half year in jail for which the prosecutor had asked. The point is, it was just a little bit of skepticism, just a little hunger for the truth and a little willingness to dig beyond what meets the eye that finally cracked this case. If a small town rural America sheriff's detective can do it with what limited resources he has, why can't national media conglomerates do it with their multi-million-dollar budgets? And sure, the detective had subpoena power to get those phone records to point him in the right direction. CNN doesn't have that. But his skepticism and curiosity went well beyond just the phone data. The sheriff's detective says he was skeptical from day one of the investigation. It was a highly unusual crime in a small town where residents mostly know each other and pride themselves on being neighborly. But specifically, Schrader's skepticism was driven by the fact that he wasn't even aware the church performed gay marriages. And so he asked his boss if he knew they did, and sure enough, he didn't. This place wasn't known as some gay marriage mecca. It was just a normal church to the outside observer, and it happened to perform gay marriages. I didn't know that. People in the county didn't know that. People I work with didn't know that. Someone down the road, so to speak, really would not have known that, Schrader said, talking about the gay marriages at the church. He began to wonder if the hateful graffiti could have been scrawled Saturday night by somebody who planned to sit in the pews Sunday morning. In other words, Schrader applied the old Judge Judy test. If it doesn't make sense to your common sense, it probably isn't true. And it wasn't just the YouTube commenters and the sheriff's detective applying their common sense either. As the Post story describes, It was the hoaxer's own mother, too. The Post paints her as a Tea Party crazy, an Alex Jones listener who's been radicalized by YouTube, and worst of all, she supports the bad orange man, an obstacle in the relationship between her and her son. In fact, the first conversation Stang had with his mom after the election was a Sunday call to report the supposedly hateful vandalism at the church, and his mom found herself unable to share his alarm. No Trump supporter would write those things, she assured him. It had to be a hoax. The implication in the reporting is that conservative activism and Alex Jones and YouTube all disconnect you from reality, or maybe even your family. But in this case, Tea Party rallying Alex Jones listening mom pegged the truth immediately, and it's taken the Washington Post 3 years to get on her level. And why? Why is it that fully staffed newsrooms with all the fact-finding tools and resources in the entire world keep losing that truth-seeking effort to randos in basements with keyboards and internet connections? The Washington Post preposterously says the issue is one of statistics and caution, not political bias. In the story, the Post reports that real hate crimes far outnumber fake ones, several thousand to a few dozen. In concurrent reporting last week, the Post asks, are hate crime hoaxes on the rise along with real hate crimes? Okay, first of all, I've said it a million times, but here's 1,000,001. There is no solid basis on which to definitively say that hate crimes are on the rise. The FBI data they used to make that claim has more police departments participating in reporting hate crimes each and every year. More participation means more reported hate crimes. Thus, the FBI says you can't make simple year-to-year comparisons. But anyway, on the hoaxes, the story cites researchers who believe something in the neighborhood of 15% of reported hate crimes are hoaxes. The Post says hoaxes may seize the national imagination, but they are all but absent from the day-to-day work of many on the ground who investigate and prosecute hate crimes. But all but absent is not absent. The question is not which is more numerous, as though 51% of the cases should dictate what our presumptions are, instead of using the evidence in any particular case to guide us instead. The question is, what is critical mass to start entertaining the possibility that any given hate crime claim before us is a hoax, and stop reporting these things as presumed true without the requisite evidence to support that conclusion. Even if only 2 to 15% of reported hate crimes are confirmed hoaxes, that is still well beyond any reasonable threshold to start at least asking questions like this sheriff's detective did. In fact, it was well beyond that threshold in 2016, which is why all these YouTube commenters now look like Babe Ruth calling their shot. To be fair to the Post, this piece is good work in many ways. It gave detailed insight into the solving of a hate crime hoax that we rarely ever see, what the evidence was, how that evidence was obtained, the tactical decision-making in pursuit of that evidence, and the benefit of demanding the substantiation of the truth, not the presumption of it. This is the right track. Now do it again, but immediately next time, not 3 years after the fact. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.